So we all had that one licensed game that we adored way more than we should have. Maybe it was that Shrek game your parents grabbed from the bargain bin. Maybe it was the SpongeBob movie game that made being a your entire personality for a summer. And yeah, looking back as an adult, maybe that game wasn't a masterpiece. Maybe the camera seemed to fight you. Maybe the combat was questionable. Maybe nowadays the cutscenes look like they were rendered on a toaster. But you remember it anyway, because it was fun, because it was different, because it felt like nothing else. And that's the thing about the PS2 era. It was overflowing with games like this. Games that shouldn't have worked, but somehow did, because developers were able to experiment. There's a reason the PlayStation 2 became the best-selling console of all time. The games that were released on the PS2 made that thing a memory machine. For so many of us, it wasn't just a box that played games. It was the doorway into some of the most imaginative worlds gaming has ever seen. But here's the thing we don't talk about with the PS2. This era wasn't special just because of nostalgia. It was magical because of the time period the console just so happened to exist in. It was a time where technology was advancing fast enough to unlock new ideas, but still limited enough that developers had to get really creative to bring these ideas to life and into our memories. Every generation has its strengths, that's for sure. But the 6th generation might have been the last time we saw creativity pushed to its absolute limit from every direction and from every sized studio. And today, I want to show you why. So any endeavor to create an artistic work has to confide within the bounds surrounding its creation, the technology used to facilitate the creative process, time restraints on when it needs to be released, the number of people working on the project. There are many factors that can place limitations on how ambitious a project can be. The early 2000s were a time where some limitations have been removed, while some others continue to push developers to work around those various limitations. Aided by technology improvements from the new consoles of the 6th generation, developers at the time were eager to create new experiences that would push this hardware and the art form forward. But relative to the imagination of game designers, this hardware was still limited in what could be realistically achieved in a video game. A very common example is the issue of space requirements. I mean, we all remember the way the PlayStation 2 needed memory cards to hold save files. And there's plenty of evidence of how this push and pull of new freedoms, accompanied by fresh limitations, impacted certain games of this era. In Grand Theft Auto 3 and Vice City, the map is split up into 3 different islands. This was due to those old consoles not being able to load the entire map at once. Each of the playable island areas was loaded in at one time, so moving across the bridge between them always triggered a loading zone that populated the next area. Talking about it with this perspective, it sounds like this was a problem, something that annoyed both the player and the developer. But this 3-island map style ended up becoming a way Rockstar would provide the player a sense of progression as they played through the game. As players would begin the game, everything would take place on only one of the 3 zones, while the other 2 remained completely locked to the player until they progressed to a specific point in the story where the next area would then become playable. While being necessary for the games to run on the hardware, this method became a way to keep the game fresh for players throughout the runtime. Even today, limitations can change the way games end up making their way to the player. But every generation, there are fewer and fewer true limitations on taking something from the imagination of a developer and getting it in front of the player. And in some ways, I'd argue that it's taking away from the creativity in the offerings of games. Where this is most apparent is in the graphics we see from game to game. These days, the way Unreal Engine 5 can push photorealism is amazing. Almost too much so, to the point where it's become the default for a new video game to take on this look. As cool as games look when they're chasing realistic graphics, it's admittedly getting boring. Looking back at games from the 6th generation from the PS2, no 2 games really look the same. Since developers back then couldn't chase photorealism, they had to develop a style in how they presented their graphics. This was more of an artistic choice that often worked in tandem with the game's tone and themes. The way a game looks is a huge factor in how memorable it is and how it can stand out to the player. The limitations in graphical ability that at the time was viewed as a hindrance to creativity, in hindsight, actually forced studios to be more creative in their presentation. It's why that generation remains so special to those who experienced it. Every game stood out in its own way, and that's something we're seeing less and less of these days. Remember all of the wacky licensed games from the early 2000s? There was no way all of them were going to be successful. But regardless, publishers spent who knows how much money pumping these games out on every console they could during this period. Oh hell yeah, the Game Boy needs a version of DreamWorks Over the Hedge. It's like printing money. And while the topic of how interesting all of these different licensed games are, and talking about which ones were great, which ones were good, and which ones should have never existed in the first place, it could honestly take up a video in and of itself. But I think their existence proves the point that there was something going on during the 6th generation that allowed the funding and development of all these games. There seemed to be larger freedom for developers of all genres and all studio sizes to take more risks with the games being created during this time. New IPs were more common. Remakes and remasters hadn't yet taken over the market. And back then, games couldn't run on 10-year-plus live service models. This environment was a driver of the variety in games being produced. And with that need for variety came the ability to allow developers to be as creative as possible. In 2004 alone, we saw Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, Halo 2, Far Cry, Scooby-Doo Mystery Mayhem, Star Wars Battlefront, Paper Mario and the Thousand-Year Door, the SpongeBob SquarePants movie game, Spider-Man 2, Need for Speed Underground 2, Half-Life 2, Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic 2, there's a lot of 2s, Fable, 007 Everything or Nothing, Mafia 1, and so many more. And that's not to say that we don't have some good lineups these days. 2026 does look like it has the potential to be one of those heavy-hitting years, with all of the upcoming releases like Grand Theft Auto 6, Gears E-Day, Halo Campaign Evolved, Forza 6, Lego Batman Legacy of the Dark Knight, 007 First Light, and there are some others, they're just not clear yet if they're actually launching this year or not. So when you look at the biggest games coming out today, you can feel the difference in the landscape. The creativity and variety we saw in the 6th generation just isn't matched now. And it's not because developers suddenly got less imaginative, and not that they've gone woke. It's because their environment changed. When developing for the PlayStation 2, a studio could take a swing at something weird, or new, or unproven. And if it didn't sell 10 million copies, the company usually didn't risk total collapse. Today, a single AAA game can cost hundreds of millions of dollars and take a decade to develop. That kind of project doesn't encourage experimentation. It encourages caution, which results in sequels, safe bets, familiar franchises, and trend-chasing ideas that have already been validated. It encourages Fortnite. And that's why the 2004 lineup feels so wild compared to what we see now. Far Cry, Battlefront, Fable, Mafia, these weren't sequels. They were first entries. 4 entire franchises that became classics were born in the same year. Compare that to 2026, where all of the big releases are continuations of decade-old series. They might be great games. No, I know they're going to be great games, but they're not new worlds. They're not taking the same kinds of risks. And due to that, we won't be making the same kinds of memories. And that's why gamers are so nostalgic for the past. The PS2 era wasn't just full of creativity, it was full of opportunity. Developers could try something bold, publishers would greenlight something strange, and players got to experience ideas that would never make it past a board meeting today. Which brings us to the real question. What does it look like when the safest option becomes the default for an entire industry? So when people say the PS2 era was special, it's not just nostalgia talking. It was a moment in time when limitations forced creativity, and creativity was rewarded with opportunity. Developers could take risks, and publishers were willing to fund those risks. And because of that, we got games that didn't just entertain us, they stuck with us. This creative environment became our collective childhood. But today, the industry is different. The technology is better, the budgets are bigger, and the risks are higher. So instead of chasing a unique or interesting new idea, studios are increasingly turning to something safer, remakes and remasters. And with millions of dollars on the line, who can really blame them? And some of these are truly fantastic, but The sheer volume of them has become fatiguing. If the PS2 era was defined by creating new memories, today's era is defined by reworking nostalgic ones. If you want to understand the issue with remakes and remasters and how our relationship with them is paradoxical, I break it all down in the video on screen now. Thanks for watching.